I buried my son 20 years ago. I stood at his grave every Sunday, mourning a boy I thought was gone forever. But last month, at 2:40 a.m., my phone rang, displaying a name that should have been buried in the past. Before I reveal the impossible truth that followed, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. This is the story of a voice that returned from the silence. I buried my son 20 years ago beneath a sprawling oak tree at Riverside Cemetery. I have stood at his grave every single Sunday for 2 decades, through rain, snow, and blistering heat, talking to 6 feet of silence. His phone number stayed in my contacts because deleting it felt like losing him twice. A final severance I couldn't bring myself to commit. I paid the bill every month for a line that went nowhere. $30 a month just to see his name. Ethan, sit there in my list of favorites. Last month, my phone rang at 2:47 a.m. His name lit up the screen in the darkness of my bedroom. I answered. A voice said, "Dad, where am I?" It was him. My lost son was calling me, confused, scared, asking why nothing made sense. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. Before I tell you what happened next, you need to understand the weight of the silence that preceded that ring. 20 years ago, I watched them lower my boy into the earth. His name was carved into cold gray stone, Ethan Sullivan, born April 12th. Ethan Jobai Bashalu, passed away November 3rd. Liang Chenling Wu. He was only 19 years old, a boy who never got the chance to become a man. The funeral lasted 40 minutes, but it felt like an eternity of suffocating grief. There were maybe 30 people there. His mother, Elena, stood beside me, but she wouldn't look at the casket. She couldn't bear it. She stared at the ground the entire time, her body trembling so violently that her sister, Martha, had to hold her up to keep her from collapsing into the dirt. My son's friends came, young kids with red, swollen eyes, who didn't know what to say to a father whose world had just ended. They shuffled their feet in uncomfortable dress shoes and mumbled condolences that meant nothing. Within a year, most of them stopped calling. Within 2 years, none of them mentioned his name. That is how grief works. The world moves on. People have to move on to survive. But I couldn't. The accident happened on a Friday night. Ethan was driving home from work, just a few miles from our house. A truck ran a red light and hit him on the driver's side. The impact killed him instantly. At least, that is what the police told me. No suffering, no pain, just gone in a flash of metal and glass. I got the call at 11:43 p.m. I remember the exact time because I was watching the late news and I looked at the clock when the phone rang, annoyed by the interruption. An officer said there had been an accident and that I needed to come to County General Hospital immediately. I knew right then. Parents always know. I drove there going 90 miles per hour, not caring if I crashed and joined him. When I arrived, they took me to a private room, and that was the confirmation. They only use private rooms for the news that destroys you. They let me see him. His face was untouched, miraculously free of the violence that had taken him. He looked asleep, peaceful. I touched his hand, and it was still warm. I stood there for 2 hours waiting for his chest to move, for a breath that never came. Elena arrived and screamed, a sound that still haunts my nightmares. She collapsed and had to be sedated. She couldn't go to the identification. She couldn't sign the papers. I did everything alone. I picked the coffin. I chose the plot. I wrote the obituary. I did it all in a fog, moving through motions I didn't understand. Grief destroyed our marriage just as surely as that truck took our son. Elena stopped visiting the grave after the first year. She said it hurt too much, that she needed to move forward to survive. We divorced 3 years after Ethan died. She remarried, had another child, and built a new life. I couldn't. I kept his room exactly the way he left it. His clothes still hung in the closet, smelling faintly of his cologne. His books sat on the shelf, and his phone number stayed in my contacts. People said I needed therapy. They said I was wallowing, that I needed to let go. I didn't care what people said. You don't get over losing a child. You just learn to walk carefully around the hole they leave behind. I accepted it. Dead is final. Until last month, on September 14th. When his number lit up my phone in the middle of the night, I was asleep when the sound jolted me awake. I grabbed the phone off my nightstand, squinting against the harsh light. The name said Ethan. My son's name. His contact photo stared back at me. A picture from his 18th birthday. Smiling, alive. I sat frozen in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The room felt suddenly freezing. My hand started shaking so badly I almost dropped the device. This couldn't be real. The number had been disconnected for 19 years. I had tried calling it hundreds of times over the years in moments of weakness, and it always went to a recorded message saying the number was no longer in service. But now, it was calling me. The phone kept ringing. 4 rings. 5 rings. I couldn't move. My thumb hovered over the answer button. What if it was a mistake? What if it was some sick prank? On the 6th ring, something inside me broke, and I pressed the button. I lifted the phone to my ear. For 3 seconds, I heard nothing but silence, empty air. Then, I heard breathing. Slow, steady, human breathing. Someone was there. Dad? The voice was quiet, confused, scared. It was one word, but it carried the weight of 20 years. I know my son's voice. I heard it every day for 19 years. I heard it in my dreams for 20 years after. This was him. Not a recording, not a memory. Dad, are you there? He asked again, his voice cracking with desperation. Michael? Ethan? I whispered, my voice unrecognizable to my own ears. There was a pause, and then he said, yeah, it's me. Where am I? The question made no sense. What do you mean? I asked, shaking. Where are you calling from? He started breathing faster, panicked. I don't know, he said. I don't know where I am. Nothing makes sense. Dad, something's wrong. Everything feels wrong. I remember the accident. I remember the truck hitting me. I remember fading away. I felt it. Dad. I left. But then I woke up. My legs gave out, and I sat down hard on the edge of the bed. My son remembered passing. He knew he was gone, but he was talking to me. Can you come get me, please? His voice broke on the word, please, sounding like the little boy he used to be. Tell me where you are, I said. Give me an address. He paused, and I heard movement, footsteps, a door opening. I don't know the address, he said. I'm in a building. It's dark. There are apartments. I'll try to find something with an address on it. Then the line went silent. Just like that. Gone. I immediately called back, but the recording played. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. I tried 15 more times, desperate, crying, screaming at the phone. Nothing. At 6:30 a.m., I drove to the cemetery. I needed proof. I needed to see that the grave was undisturbed. The morning was cold and gray, fog hanging low over the headstones. I walked to the oak tree. Ethan's grave looked exactly the same as always. Gray stone, fresh flowers from my visit 3 days prior. The ground was solid. No one had dug him up. Ethan, are you down there? I whispered to the grass. It was a stupid question. I buried him myself. But when I checked my phone, the call history remained. Ethan, 2:47 a.m. 9 minutes and 43 seconds. It wasn't a hallucination. 3 days passed with agonizing slowness. I barely ate or slept, clutching my phone like a lifeline. On the 4th day, at 3:15 a.m., it rang again. I answered instantly. Ethan. Dad. His voice came through, sounding worse than before. Tired, desperate. I found something. I found an address. My heart jumped into my throat. I grabbed a pen. What is it? He read it slowly. 4247 Riverside Avenue, Apartment 8, Moorfield, West Virginia. I wrote it down, my hands shaking. That's 2 states away. I said, "What are you doing there?" He made a sound between a laugh and a sob. "I don't know how I got here. But Dad, something is really wrong. I went outside today, and people looked right through me. A woman walked into me, actually into me, like I wasn't solid. I think I'm gone. I think I'm a ghost or something. I look in mirrors, and I see someone older. I see a face that's almost mine, but not quite. Can you please come get me?" "I'm coming," I said. "I'm leaving right now. I'll be there in 8 hours." Before I left, I did something I knew sounded insane. I called the phone company. It was 4 a.m., but I needed to know. A woman answered, and I asked for records of my son's number. She told me it had been inactive for 19 years. "That's impossible," I argued. "I received 2 calls from it this week." She transferred me to a supervisor, a man named Mr. Thompson. His voice was professional but firm. "Mr. Sullivan, I've reviewed the account personally. The number has been deactivated for nearly 2 decades. Our system shows no recent activity whatsoever. Is it possible you received calls from a different number that displayed incorrectly?" I felt anger rising, hot and sharp. "I know my son's number," I snapped. "I've had it saved for 20 years. I'm looking at my call log right now." Mr. Thompson's tone shifted, becoming gentle, the way one speaks to a child or a madman. "Sir, sometimes grief can cause us to see things that aren't there. Perhaps you should speak with a professional." I hung up on him. I didn't need a therapist. I needed answers. I took screenshots of my call log. I recorded a video of the screen. I had the evidence. I threw clothes into a bag, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door. I was driving to West Virginia to find a ghost, or perhaps to find a miracle. I drove straight through, stopping only for gas and black coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. The address was burned into my brain, 4247 Riverside Avenue, Apartment 8, Moorfield, West Virginia. I arrived at 11:47 a.m., my body vibrating from caffeine and anxiety. The GPS led me to an old red brick building on the east side of town, a structure that looked like it had been forgotten by time. Something was wrong immediately. The windows on the first floor were boarded up with plywood, and the front door was secured with a heavy chain and padlock. A faded orange sign hung crookedly on the fence. Condemned, no trespassing. Scheduled for demolition. My stomach dropped to the pavement. This building was abandoned, a hollow shell. How could Ethan be here? I parked across the street and stared at the rotting structure for 10 minutes, checking my notes again and again. It was the right address. I had to see for myself. The chain-link fence had holes cut in multiple places, inviting trouble. I slipped through a gap and approached the building, finding a side door with a broken lock. I pushed it open, the rusted hinges screaming in the silence, and stepped into the darkness. The smell hit me instantly, a suffocating mix of mold, wet rot, and stale air. I turned on my phone's flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom to reveal peeling wallpaper and stained carpet littered with trash. It was a graveyard of a building, filled with the debris of squatters and decay. I walked slowly down the hall, my footsteps echoing too loudly. Apartment 1, Apartment 2, all empty, doors hanging off hinges, interiors gutted. I forced myself to climb the stairwell to the second floor, then the third, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and then I found it. Apartment 8 was at the end of the third-floor hallway. Unlike every other door in this godforsaken place, this one was closed and intact. The brass number 8 was polished and clean, gleaming in my flashlight beam. I stood there for a full minute, terrified of what I might find. I reached out and turned the handle. It wasn't locked. The door swung open silently, and I stopped breathing. The apartment was perfect. It was completely, impossibly perfect. While the rest of the building was a rotting carcass, this unit looked like a showroom. The walls were painted a soft, welcoming blue. The beige carpet was spotless with fresh vacuum lines, and the air didn't smell like decay. It smelled of lavender soap and freshly brewed coffee. I walked inside, my legs feeling like lead. The living room was furnished with a brown couch, a coffee table, and a television. A normal home in the middle of a disaster zone, but it was the walls that made my vision blur. They were covered in photographs. I walked closer, my hands shaking. They were photos of my family, me, Elena, and Ethan. Pictures from his childhood that I had in albums back home. But then I moved to the next wall, and my reality fractured. These photos showed Ethan older. Ethan in his 20s. Ethan in his 30s. Photos that never existed because my son died at 19. There he was, wearing a graduation gown I never saw him wear, sitting at a restaurant with strangers. Standing in front of this very apartment building, looking about 35 years old, I stumbled into the kitchen, needing to ground myself. There were clean dishes in the rack and a mug on the counter with coffee still warm at the bottom. I opened the refrigerator. It was stocked with milk, eggs, and leftovers. The milk expired in 5 days. Someone was living here. I closed the door and saw a note held up by a magnet. The handwriting was messy, a scrawl I would recognize anywhere. It was Ethan's. I pulled the note down and read it, tears blurring the ink. Dad, if you're reading this, I don't know what's happening to me. I woke up here 3 weeks ago with no memory of how I got here. I have ID that says my name is Lucas Bennett. I'm 38 years old. I work at a factory. I have an apartment and a life I don't remember living. But it's not my life. I remember being Ethan. I remember you. I remember Mom. I remember fading away in that accident. I felt the impact. Then I woke up here as someone else. 20 years passed, but I don't remember any of it. The people here know me as Lucas. They've known me for years, but I'm not Lucas. I'm Ethan, your son. I think I'm supposed to be gone. Please help me figure out what happened. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket, the silence of the room pressing in on me. My son was alive, living a stranger's life in a condemned building, and he was begging me for help. I walked into the bedroom, the door creaking softly on its hinges, feeling like an intruder in a life that was both familiar and alien. The room was tidy, the bed made with military precision. On the nightstand, next to a lamp that looked exactly like one we had in our living room in 1999, sat a wallet and a set of keys. I picked up the wallet, my fingers trembling as I flipped it open. The driver's license inside showed a face that was undeniably older, rougher, yet possessing the same eyes that had looked up at me from a crib. The name on the license read Lucas Bennett, but the date of birth was a punch to the gut, April 12th, Itenjo by Bashalo. Ethan's birthday? The address was right here, 4247 Riverside Avenue, apartment 8. I sat down heavily on the edge of the bed because my legs simply refused to hold me upright any longer. My son left us 20 years ago. I buried him. But according to this plastic card, he had been living here under a different name, a ghost hiding in plain sight. I needed more than just a license. I began searching the drawers, not out of malice, but out of a desperate need for sanity. In the bottom drawer of the nightstand, buried under a stack of old utility bills, I found a thick manila envelope. Inside were medical records, hospital visits, prescriptions, and a thick file from a neurologist. I pulled out the papers and started reading, and with every sentence, the world tilted further off its axis. The records painted an impossible picture. According to the documents, Lucas Bennett had been admitted to County General Hospital on November 3rd, Liangqianlingwu, the same hospital where Ethan passed, the same night. The file stated that he had been brought in following a severe car accident involving multiple traumas and significant head injuries. He had been in a coma for 6 days. When he woke up, he had complete retrograde amnesia. No memory of his name, his family, or his life before the crash. No identification was found at the scene. He became a John Doe. I read the date again, November 3rd, Liang Wu. The intake time was listed as 11:58 p.m. My son was pronounced lost at 12:17 a.m. The overlap was terrifying. The file detailed how social services had helped him build a new identity as Lucas Bennett when no one came to claim him. He had chosen the name himself because he couldn't remember his real one. Clipped to the inside cover of the file was a faded business card, Dr. Emily Park, neurologist, County General Hospital. I didn't hesitate. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number, praying it was still valid after 2 decades. A receptionist answered, and I demanded to speak to Dr. Park, claiming it was an urgent matter regarding a past case. After a 10-minute hold that felt like a lifetime, a woman's voice came on the line, sharp and professional. "This is Dr. Park. Who am I speaking with?" "My name is Connor Sullivan," I said, my voice shaking. "My son, Ethan Sullivan, passed away in a car accident on November 3rd. Liang Wu, at County General. You treated a John Doe that same night. Same accident, same injuries. He woke up with amnesia and became Lucas Bennett. I am sitting in his apartment right now, reading his medical file. I need to know what happened that night." There was a long silence on the other end, heavy with unspoken questions. "Mr. Sullivan," she finally said, her tone cautious. "I remember that case. It was highly unusual. We had 2 young men brought in from the same intersection within an hour of each other. Both were in critical condition. Both had severe head trauma. One didn't make it. The other survived but lost all memory of his identity. Is there any chance they could have been confused?" I asked, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Could their charts have been mixed up? Could there have been a mistake about which one didn't survive? "Mr. Sullivan," she hid, "you identified your son's body. You saw him. We use strict protocols. However, give me until tomorrow. I will pull the archives. But please, prepare yourself. Grief can make us see patterns that aren't there." I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the apartment, surrounded by the life of a stranger who might be my son. The next morning, Dr. Park called me back. Her voice had lost its professional edge. She sounded shaken. "Mr. Sullivan, can you come to the hospital? Immediately." I found something. Driving back to County General felt like driving back in time to the worst night of my life. The smell of antiseptic in the lobby triggered a wave of nausea. Dr. Park met me and led me to a small, private office. She looked pale. On her desk were 2 stacks of folders and a laptop. "I spent the night going through the physical archives," she said without preamble. "What I found is disturbing." She opened the first folder. Patient A arrived at 11:52 p.m., pronounced deceased at 12:17 a.m. You identified this patient as Ethan Sullivan. She slid a death certificate toward me. I knew it well. Then she opened the second folder. Patient B arrived 6 minutes later. Also critical, also severe facial and head trauma. He survived but became our John Doe. Lucas Bennett. She turned her laptop screen toward me. "Look at this." Side-by-side photos appeared. On the left, a hospital intake photo of the John Doe from 2005. Bruised, swollen, unconscious. On the right, a copy of Lucas Bennett's current driver's license. Mr. Sullivan. The police report from that night lists only 1 car accident at that intersection. A truck hit a sedan. There was only 1 driver in the sedan, yet we received 2 young male patients with nearly identical injuries from that location within minutes of each other. How is that possible? I whispered, staring at the screen. The boy in the hospital bed, despite the swelling, had the same jawline as Ethan. It's not possible, Dr. Park said, her voice trembling slightly. Unless there was a catastrophic error in the triage and transport process, unless the chaos of the night led to charts being swapped or patients being mislabeled before they even reached the trauma bay. Mr. Sullivan, you identified a body that had severe facial trauma. In a moment of extreme shock, the brain often fills in the gaps to confirm what we fear most. I believe we may have declared the wrong person gone. The room spun. So you're telling me I buried the wrong person? I stood up, fury and hope warring in my chest. You're telling me I've been visiting a stranger's grave for 20 years while my son was alive, alone, and scared? I am saying the evidence suggests a high probability of misidentification, Dr. Park said softly. The man living as Lucas Bennett has the same blood type, the same approximate age, and consistent physical features. She handed me a piece of paper and a small plastic bag containing a sterile swab. This is where Lucas Bennett works. He's on the night shift at the manufacturing plant. And this is a DNA test kit. If you can get a sample, we will know for sure within 48 hours. I took the kit, my hand gripping it so hard, my knuckles turned white. He doesn't remember me, I said, the realization hitting me again. He wrote a note saying he remembers the end, but he doesn't know who I am. That is the tragedy of this, Mr. Sullivan. Dr. Park warned, her eyes full of pity. Even if the DNA matches, the boy you knew is gone. Lucas Bennett has lived a lifetime without you. He is a different person now. Approaching him will be traumatic for both of you. I don't care, I said, turning to the door. He called me. He reached out. He's my son, and I'm going to bring him home. I walked out of the hospital, leaving behind the ghosts of the past, armed with an address and a desperate hope that the nightmare was finally ending. My son was alive, and I was going to find him. I drove to the manufacturing plant that night at 10:45 p.m., my heart pounding a rhythm against my ribs that felt dangerous for a man of my age. The factory sat on the desolate edge of town, a hulking metal beast surrounded by empty fields and illuminated by harsh, buzzing sodium lights. I parked my car in the shadows, watching the shift change, watching men in steel-toed boots and worn denim shuffle in and out like clockwork. I didn't know exactly what Lucas Bennett looked like in the flesh. I only had the sterile, two-dimensional image from his driver's license and the impossible photos from the apartment. I waited, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, terrified of what I might see. At 10:52 p.m., a silver sedan pulled into the lot. A man stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy brown jacket against the chill. I couldn't see his face clearly in the gloom, but then he walked under a street lamp. He paused, shifted his backpack, and ran a hand through his hair. A quick, nervous gesture that stopped my breath. It was a gesture I had seen 1,000 times at the breakfast table, before baseball games, and right before he walked out the door for the last time. It was Ethan. I stepped out of my car, my legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. I followed him, keeping my distance. Watching him move, he walked with a slight slouch, the same way Ethan used to walk when he was tired or deep in thought. I stopped near the entrance, unable to go further. I could see his face now. It was older, weathered by time and a hard life I hadn't been there to witness. There were lines around his eyes and a heaviness to his jaw, but it was him. It was my son, 20 years older, a ghost made of flesh and blood. I stood there crying silently in the parking lot, overwhelmed by a grief that was suddenly, violently transforming into hope. I waited for 3 hours. I couldn't just ambush him. I needed the right moment. At 2:15 a.m., the workers spilled out for their break. I saw him separate from the group, walking to the chain-link fence to smoke a cigarette alone. I approached him, every step a battle against the urge to run away or to run forward and embrace him. When I was 20 feet away, he turned, our eyes locked. For a few seconds, the world went silent. I saw confusion flicker across his face, followed by a dawning, terrified recognition. "Can I help you?" he asked. His voice was deeper, rougher than the boy I remembered, but the cadence was the same. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." The irony of his words nearly buckled my knees. "I'm sorry," I managed to choke out. You look like someone I used to know." Lucas stared at me, his brow furrowing. He took a step closer, discarding his cigarette. "That's weird," he said slowly, tilting his head. "You look familiar too. Have we met before?" I shook my head. "I don't think so. I'm not from around here." I moved into the light, close enough to see the small, white scar on his chin, the one from the bicycle accident when he was 7. It was there. It was undeniable. "What's your name?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Lucas," he said, then hesitated. "Lucas Bennett. And you?" I almost said Connor. I almost told him everything right there. "John," I lead, the name tasting like ash. "John Williams." Lucas nodded, but he didn't look away. He looked haunted. "This is going to sound crazy," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But I feel like I know you. Like I've seen you in a dream. I've been having these nightmares lately, vivid ones, about a life I don't remember. I see a man, an older man who looks exactly like you, standing over a grave. The air between us crackled with electricity." "What happens in the dream?" I asked. Lucas looked down at his hands. "He's crying. He calls me by a name that isn't mine. He calls me Ethan." I felt the tears spill over then, hot and fast. "Ethan." I repeated the name. Lucas flinched as if I had struck him. "How do you know that name?" he demanded, his voice rising in panic. "I wrote that name in my phone notes 3 weeks ago. I woke up writing 'I am Ethan' over and over again." "Who are you?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out the DNA test kit Dr. Park had given me. "I need you to trust me," I said, my voice breaking. "I need you to let me take a swab. Just a cheek swab. It will take 10 seconds." He stared at the kit, then at me, fear warring with a desperate need for answers. "Why?" he asked. "Because I think you're my son," I said. "I think you're Ethan, and I think you've been alive this whole time." Lucas stumbled back, his face draining of color. "My father is gone. I remember passing away. I remember the crash." "So do I," I said. "I buried you. I visited your grave for 20 years. But you called me Lucas. You called me from a disconnected number and led me here." He looked at me for a long, agonizing moment, searching for a lie in my eyes. He didn't find one. "Okay," he whispered. "Do it." I swabbed his cheek, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped the vial. We exchanged numbers. Real numbers this time. "What happens if it's positive?" he asked, his voice small. "I don't remember you, John Connor. I don't remember being your son. I've lived as Lucas for 20 years. What if I can't be him again?" "Then we figure it out," I promised. "We start from now." 2 days later, Dr. Emily Park called me. I was sitting in the motel room, staring at the phone. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "The results are conclusive. It's a match. Lucas Bennett is your biological son. Ethan is alive." I hung up and wept until my chest ached. I called Lucas immediately. "It's positive," I said. "You're my son." There was a long silence on the other end, followed by the sound of jagged, broken sobbing. We cried together over the phone line, two strangers connected by blood and a miracle, mourning the 20 years the universe had stolen from us. We agreed to meet at a diner halfway between the factory and his apartment. When he walked in, the daylight revealed the truth even more starkly. He was Ethan, but he was also Lucas. He was a man who had built a life on a foundation of amnesia and trauma. We sat in a booth, 2 cups of coffee growing cold between us. "I don't know where to start," he said, wiping his eyes. "I feel like I'm reading a book about someone else's life." "I buried you," I said, needing him to understand the depth of the impossible. "I mourned you every day." "I'm sorry," he said, reaching across the table. "I know it's not my fault, but I'm sorry you went through that." We talked for hours. I told him about his mother, Elena, and how the grief had torn us apart. I told him about his childhood, trying to spark a memory, a feeling, anything. He listened intently, sometimes frowning, sometimes smiling sadly. "It feels like a museum," he said at one point. "I'm looking at artifacts, but I don't remember using them." But then, I mentioned his old dog, Buster, and a flicker of recognition crossed his eyes. "A golden retriever?" he asked. "With a black spot on his ear?" I nodded, hope surging in my chest. Yes, that was him. It wasn't much, but it was a start. We agreed to take it slow. He wasn't ready to meet his mother yet, and I understood. We had to build a relationship from the ashes of 2 destroyed lives. The final piece of the puzzle lay in the ground. I authorized the exhumation of the grave I had visited for 2 decades. Dr. Park helped facilitate the testing. The body beneath the oak tree belonged to a young man named Daniel Reed, a runaway from Ohio who had been hitchhiking through the area that night. He had no family looking for him, no one to claim him. In the chaos of the hospital, with 2 young men broken and bleeding, a mistake had been made. Daniel had passed away, and because he carried no ID, and because my grief-stricken mind saw what it expected to see, he was buried as Ethan. I paid for Daniel to be reburied properly, with his own name on the stone. He had carried my son's burden for 20 years. It was the least I could do. After the DNA results came back, the phone calls from the disconnected number stopped completely. My phone never rang at 2:47 a.m. Again, whatever tear in the fabric of reality had allowed Ethan to reach out, whatever force had bridged the gap between the living and the lost, had finished its work. It had brought us together. I had buried my son 20 years ago, and I had grieved him with every fiber of my being. But now, as I sat across from a 38-year-old man who was learning to call me dad again, I realized that grief was just love, with nowhere to go. Now, finally, it had a home. I had brought him back from the silence, not as the boy I lost, but as the man he was meant to be. And that was enough.